Hey there everybody, I just want to make sure that you know about some new video work that I've done. I've really put my all into this stuff, doing drawing challenges that are different from anything I've ever attempted before. So click on the link in the description box below and go to ah.com to check it out. I think you're really going to like this stuff, and you can't see it anywhere else. Hey there everybody, it's Mark Crilley. I'm back with another How to Draw video, continuing this ongoing video on showing you a series, or showing you an illustration done in real time. Now this week I want to switch to watercolors, but before I do that I'm actually tweaking a few things here. As I looked at the illustration, I felt that there was a little too much of a lean going this way, and I feel like her whole body appears to be leaning a little more forward than I really want. So I'm going to tweak this just a touch here in this opening part of the video. I'll tell you, man, once you commit to all real time, it really becomes a warts and all process. People can see when you have to change things, but you know, this is the way it really goes as an illustrator. You don't always get it right the very first time. Be prepared to, and especially if you're going to be doing full color stuff like watercolors like I'm about to do, you want to make sure you're happy with your illustration before you start putting color down, because it's pretty hard to change things after you've put color. Very easy to change things when you're still at the pencil stage, considerably harder to change them when you are at the coloring stage. So don't want to spend too much time messing around with this, but I do feel like she was sort of leaning a little too far forward. It's I always struggle with actually just drawing someone standing there. It's surprisingly difficult, I find, to get a pose like this to look natural. But let's say that we've got this about as good as we need it to be. Of course, this changes where I planned to put these reflections in these puddles down here that we're going to see later on. And if I do indeed feel that she's close enough to a good standing pose, then I can commit a little bit to where the reflections are going to go in these puddles. But I'll say a word now as I'm preparing about the watercolors. I'm going to be using these Winsor Newton watercolors that are just available at art stores. I hesitate to, as you all know, talk about name brands. I know that I've got viewers all over the world, and they may not have Winsor Newton where they are. I'd say just, you know, go to your local art supply store and ask them, you know, what are your good watercolors? And the watercolors that I use are in a tube rather than like in dried form, like in a box, you know, where they have little squares or whatever. I don't like to use that kind of watercolor. I like it, they're in liquid form in little tubes, and then you have a tray or whatever that you can put them in to mix up colors. Anyway, let us say that we are finally done with the penciling stage. Oh my goodness, I spent 3 minutes of my watercolor video tweaking the pencils, people. It is time to move on, and I'm going to go ahead and start watercoloring in a pale blue for these distant mountains or hills or whatever we see there in the background. Now blue may seem like an odd color choice for mountains, but it does happen sometimes. If you look at photographs, mountains in the distance can take on a bluish tint, which is, I guess, what they call atmospheric perspective, that it's so far away that, you know, mist or whatever in the air is changing the color, making them appear bluish in a way that they wouldn't if you were up close. So I am basically just going in here and going right over where I said I was going to put these trees. I still intend to put the trees there, but the way I'm going to do these trees is to make them considerably darker than the hills behind them. So rather than try really hard to go right around the edge, I'm just like sweeping right in front of them and then figuring that we'll be able to sort of blot this out later on when we come in to to do those trees. And that's probably enough for that one. We want to continue, of course, over here on the other side. Not only passing in front of the trees, but going right over where the fence is going to be. All of this stuff is just my technique. Rather than obsessing over filling in all the little blanks, if I'm doing a light background color like this, I'll just give myself the freedom to sweep the brush right over these areas, and again, figure that the darker colors will be coming in the middle. Now, this, the one thing that I may allow myself to do in this video, I talk about real time, is allow to hit a sort of a pause button on the camera if I need to let something dry. That seems like a reasonable cheat in terms of, you know, to what degree is this all real time and live. But for now, let us try to avoid even that. I'm not going to hit the pause button. I'm coming in to do the road here. I've chosen a kind of a ochre brownish color here. And just coming in. Now, one thing that I use as a general rule is if I want things to seem closer to the viewer, I make them darker. So I'm going to try to lighten this road surface color up as we reach that background, and then let it get darker near the front, near the bottom of this image area. And as I said last week, I'm a little worried that this video in particular is going to look a little crummy at the end, because this is a base layer of color. I intend to do a lot of work on top of it with colored pencils, various tools, in the following two videos, part 3 and 4, the exciting adventures of completing an illustration real time. So this is the one where I think it's gonna kind of look bad, quite honestly, at the end of this 20-minute period. But so be it. Let the people see how it really goes. Now, I'm going to go ahead and commit to a fairly bright color of green here for the grass. Kind of tricky to know how bright I want to go, but I'm just going to go ahead and jump in here, and you can kind of tweak colors like this a little bit later on, like I said, with the color pencils and so forth. Oh, a word about the paper. This is Strathmore Smooth Surface Bristol. It's thicker than, certainly than sort of office paper or whatever, you know, some of those drawing pad papers. And some people, I fear, have attempted watercolor on a drawing pad piece of paper that's very thin, and of course it wrinkles up and it looks terrible, and they may reject watercolor altogether based on that one bad experience that they had using it on paper that is not strong enough to withstand all that water. So if you've had that experience in the past and you're like, I tried using watercolors, but it wrinkled everything up and I hate watercolors now, try getting Smooth Surface Bristol. It's kind of almost like a card stock. It's very sturdy and thick, and I find that it holds up pretty well to watercolor. So I'm going in here and putting down a base layer of green. Now here, interestingly, I'm not sweeping over this area with the brush. I am actually picking and choosing where the green goes and then where it is hidden by the shrine. That's because this green is fairly dark and I don't want it to show through. So, but again, these are all just my techniques. Some people may have done that distant mountain in the same way and tried to paint around the contours of the fence and so forth. Everyone comes up with their own way of doing these things. And so, like I said, I will eventually be building on top of this grass, especially this foreground grass, in a pretty substantial way to make this more detailed and appear a lot closer to us. But maybe I will, even right now, commit to a little more darkness here. And then I should probably move away from doing this grass stuff and move more into watercoloring some of this other areas of the drawing, if only to give the grass a little time to dry. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to switch. Maybe it's time to switch and try to do these distant trees. So I'm going to go now to a darker green. I'm using my watercolors to sort of mix the green a little darker. Of course, these trees are in what I would call a mid-ground. You know, they're not super close to us. They're not super far away. So it's a darker shade, but I'm not going to go super dark. So I'm going in here now to do these trees, and as you see, it's kind of coming right on top of that layer of blue color that I had done earlier. This is not so much a how-to video in the sense of like, oh, here's how to draw a tree, or here's how to draw a fence, or whatever. It's really more about the various illustration techniques, the order in which I do them. And again, watch here, I'm going right over the fence area. That's because I intend to make this fence a pretty dark shade of wood, and I think it'll just kind of obliterate this green tree in the distance. Now, one thing that's sort of happening with this tree naturally as the water or the color seeps out of the brush is it's darker near the top than it is at the bottom, and I kind of like that, and I often do that on purpose, and so I'm kind of going with the flow there and allowing this tree to be dark near the top, pale near the bottom. And what that does is create a feeling of sort of mist in the air that's maybe low down near the grass, and I love that kind of a look. So I'm going to try to repeat that a little here with this one tree that's way over near the edge. Boy, I don't think it's even showing up. Can you believe it? I zoomed in so close that you can't see the tree in the distance. Hang on just a second, folks. I'm going to refocus here so that you can see the full illustration. Alright, well, sorry about that. My first pause, really, in the process, but I promise you I didn't do anything during that pause, except to refocus the camera. And, yeah, my apologies. I did not have, during that whole last video, I did not have the whole frame in focus. So now, for the first time, really, you're seeing the entire illustration as I intended it to be. Such the professional I am in terms of making these videos. And now I'm going to come down here and do just a little more of that, of like the trees that are in the distance. Although I guess these also should be fairly pale. Now what you can do sometimes is grab a little bit of tissue, like so, and lighten up the illustration. Maybe I'll do a little of that here, just to sort of tone it down a little bit. And yeah, I guess I should have some indication of trees, mainly again for compositional purposes. I'm going to get some indication of trees back here on the other side of the road. Yeah, I gotta lighten this up though. Lighten up, dude. And maybe finally one last indication of trees way over on this right hand side. I just feel like they need to be balanced out just a touch over here. And yeah, this is all going right on top of the fence area. But after we let this dry a little bit, I'll be able to go back in there and do the fence. Now, I do feel time pressing down on me. This video may go a little long. So be it. So be it. But we do need to start getting in here and adding some color to this figure here. I'm going to go right over her umbrella. This is all just base layer stuff. Like I said, I may add a bit more color to this figure later on, but for now I'm almost going to turn her into a bit of a silhouette. And we'll make some decisions about color later on in the process. Alright. Pretty tentative at this stage. But sometimes even during the base layer stage, I'll allow myself to go back in just a touch and maybe darken up the other side of that umbrella. Give it a little more depth. Maybe we can commit to the idea of her having dark hair. One of the reasons, I confess, why I chose an image with a character that's some distance from us is that I didn't want to have to labor over the details of her face and so forth, so as to add, yet another time-consuming aspect. You can, when you have a character that's pretty far away like this, you can get away with a lot of impressionistic stuff, kind of like what I'm doing right now, where her hair is almost blending in with the color of the umbrella. But I feel like it's time to maybe stop with this finicky coloring stuff and move right on to the shrine. And the shrine is also going to be this sort of grayish color. I'll go ahead and do this kind of the same thing that I did for her, almost go over the whole thing in a silhouetted way before going back in to do some of the darker areas. Now, one mistake, I guess you can say, that I made is I left some of these guidelines here that are fighting against the surface of that rooftop. I really should have erased that. Gotta live with it now, though, baby. But hopefully I'll be able to cover that up a bit with other coloring tools later in the process. And, I'll just continue doing this whole thing in a kind of a washed out gray with the intent of coming back and adding a bit more form later on. I don't want this stone here to be too bright or too darkly toned, though, so I'm sort of trying to lighten that up a little bit preemptively. Now, once we've got that in place now, and we're going to let that dry, maybe it's a good time for me to move over and do this fence. And I'm a little nervous about doing that with a big, thick brush. I think I'll switch to a thinner brush to do the tones of the fence. It's going to be a brown mixed with gray, just to sort of set it apart a little bit from the colors I've been using for her and for the shrine. So I'm mixing up a sort of brownish gray here. And I'll go in and start with this first support beam of the fence. I do have to make this a certain darkness, though, because I am trying to pass in front of the, like I said, the trees and the hillside and all this stuff that I had put in there in a light way. So I'm kind of darkening this up a bit, making it strong enough to come in front of the trees behind it. This is, we're getting into the foreground, I'd say, at this stage. This fence is supposed to be considerably closer to us than those trees. And that's why I have to commit a certain level of darkness to these beams. I have to admit, painting this fence is not a lot of fun. It's just a bunch of lines. And it's not the most exciting thing to do. But I do think it adds to the composition to have the sort of horizontal movement of these fence lines. So that's why I decided to have it be part of the illustration. And as we get further away, I'm going to let this fence lighten up quite a bit. Again, atmospheric perspective at work. But over here on the left side of the illustration, we are going to need those lines to be considerably darker. So I'm sort of beefing up the color a bit and dashing in these lines. Now again, this is the base layer of color. I'm going to be able to tweak this a bit with colored pencils and so forth later in the process. Just trying to get something down there to get us started. And, a lot of the stuff that you see in the distant background, like the hills and the trees, I don't know how much more detail that's going to get. I mean, you should know as an illustrator that you're on a bit of a journey as you're working on an illustration, and you don't know how much you're going to define things. You know, like this foreground is going to be fairly defined with a lot of line work. These trees and stuff in the background, I may just sort of leave those as those washed out impressionistic tones. It sort of all depends on, as the illustration comes together, it just depends on whether I feel that they need any more definition than what they've got. Now you may look at this fence and say, well, it's looking sort of darker, less brown over on this end than what you did over there. And that's true, that as I mixed together the paint, I started to lose some of the brown. It started to go just to sort of a gray. And sometimes that will disappoint you. Other times that's sort of like a happy accident, and you're like, hey, yeah, let's sort of give some variety to this fence instead of having it all be one color. So, let me see. Boy, we're coming up on the 20-minute mark. I do feel that I need a little more work on this base layer before I let this video go. So, I'm going to work my way back into especially the shrine, and I'm going to stick with this smaller brush, actually, mixing up a darker shade, kind of a bluish shade rather than that brownish shade I was using. I'm going to go in here then and start doing the other side of this shrine roof, and just sort of, for now, just kind of darkening it all in a way that doesn't really show detail, but does push the other side of that shrine roof, the underside of it, I guess I should say, back away from us, and let this lighter side seem closer. So this is kind of, you're adding color, but you're also defining structure at the same time. Now this beam here, as you look at it, is closer to us. You have to sort of keep track of which beam is where in the illustration. And I'm going to use this darker color that I've mixed up, like I said, this slightly bluish dark color, to fill in this whole edge that's closest to us. I'm just going to go ahead and commit to that. There's no turning back, man. Let's just do it. Be fearless. And we're adding this in, again, mainly for structural purposes, although there's some maybe compositional aspect to that as well. I'm going to add a little bit of extra bluish darkness on the other side there to further define that structure. And maybe get a touch more on the other side of this thing I've been calling the obelisk. I don't know if that's the right word. Somebody help me. But that's going to also make this seem a little more three-dimensional. Whoops, a little more solid. I hope people are enjoying this. I know this is like way more slow moving than almost any video I've done before, I think, simply because it is all real time. But as we reach this 20-25 minute mark, I do feel like it's probably time to wind this one down, and happily I do feel like I've kind of got everything that I want in terms of a base layer of color. There's plenty more that can be done with the road and with the grass and so forth, but I think I'm going to save most of that for video part 3 in terms of that. That's where I'm going to be adding colored pencil to further define things, give more texture and so forth. For now, I'm just going to drop in a little bit of extra line work here on the road in watercolor, so that it's not completely left up to the colored pencil to finish that off. And yeah, this is, as I said, this is the one that I was a little worried that at the end of this second video that we would have an illustration that looks messy and unfinished, but to tell you the truth, it doesn't look so bad to me. It's got that sort of impressionist painting quality to it. It turned out better than I thought in terms of how it looks so far, but we are truly only at the halfway point. And you can look forward to, I hope you'll be looking forward to, 2 more videos that further this process and take you all the way to the end and provide us with a truly finished illustration. So let's go ahead then and lay down this brush. Turns out it's a brush this time. I want to thank you all for watching this video. I really hope you liked it, and we'll be back with another one real soon.